syrup. I'm looking down below because I now no longer just throw my ukulele to the side. I put it in a nice little stand. And so now I have to actually pay attention to where I put it. So it goes in the stand. But hey, everybody, it is time for the Maple Syrup Show. And, hopefully there's going to be some people watching very shortly and they're coming on. I see numbers popping up on the side of the screen. So that means people are watching, which is great. And tonight we have a very special guest all the way from the other side of the world, like almost pretty much. Well, I don't know actually what's directly on the other side of the world to me, but it might be Natalie. It might be Natalie. Natalie Kerschner is here from all the way. Are you in New Zealand or are you in Australia right now?
I'm in New Zealand, but I am Australian, so I cover both.
Right, because the accent was sort of different, but I knew there was some New Zealand things in there. Yeah.
Well done.
See, I'm learning, right, Kat? It's like
I'm very proud of you.
Do they sound like Kat? No, then they're Australian.
And Australians say crikey a lot, so we give it away.
Oh, do you? But New Zealanders don't?
Crikey.
No.
Rural New Zealanders of like my grandfather's age say crikey.
No, New Zealanders say munted instead, and that confuses us. So,
what's that?
Munted, like mutated, kind of squished,
stuffed up.
Oh,
screwed.
Interesting.
Yeah, or very drunk. Like you can go out and get munted, or you can drop something and it ends up munted, or you can be a munter as well.
M-U-N-T-E-D?
Yes, M-U-N-T-E-D. Yeah, okay. You can be a munter as well, which means that you're
not nice.
A mess.
Is that like a punter in Britain?
No, nothing like it. No.
No.
I'd be like, that guy thought that he would be able to ask me out on a date, but he's such a mess. He's just a total munter. I'd never go for that.
Got it.
Britons say knackered.
But that means tired.
No, that's tired. Yeah, that's tired. It can be broken, but it's broken in the sense of tired.
That's what I thought.
Oh,
and then I heard like a girl say, "No, he can't ask me out because he's totally knackered." Like I would never.
Yeah, that's a little more like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I get that, but it's not the same as munted. Munted sounds like bad, like really bad.
Oh yeah, like broken, kind of.
But it's not a swear word. It just sounds like a swear word.
I see.
Yes, it rhymes with the favorite Australian swear word, which is completely normal for us. It doesn't offend people anywhere near as much as it does here in North America. So,
because well, you understand that North America was inhabited by Puritans.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot about North America that doesn't make much sense. All right, so let's get started now that we know a little bit about the diversity of language across the various colonies, which is kind of wonderful. Jason, they're absolutely munted, mate. Okay, I'm gonna leave that up. We're gonna leave that up for a little bit. So we're here on Maple Syrup, and today we're gonna be talking about UX, UI, what's the difference, all that kind of stuff. But before we get there, I would love if Natalie could tell us a little about her origin stories and how she got into UX and what she does that she can talk about. She can't talk about everything, but what can she talk about, and how that relates to tabletop in any way, shape, or form.
Sweet.
Take it away, Natalie.
Okay, so basically I'm a user experience research expert. So I'm a design researcher, which basically means that usually I get brought in when somebody's had a brilliant idea and they want to develop a product, and then I have to step in front of them and go, this is awesome. Let's take it back and actually figure out what's this opportunity, what's the problem, what are we trying to solve, who is it for? So I work with the people who have the brilliant ideas and really make sure that we're building something that's going to have a purpose, not just something that somebody thinks is a great idea. So I've been doing this for, well, a lot of years now, 24 years in the industry.
So old.
Yep. Yes. So mostly I've been focused in the IT world, but the principles that we follow as design researchers is exactly the same for any product design. So I also design services to make sure that they're actually meeting people's needs, not just business goals, because people tend to think, we've got a business, this is going to make a lot of money, but if it's not actually meeting a need, it's not actually going to be successful. So I've been doing, work in Australia and New Zealand for a lot of years. And basically, I'm the annoying toddler in the room because I come in with all the excited people and then I just ask why a lot until I slowly kill their soul, but we get a really good product out of it.
It's worth the soul being killed to get the good product, I guess.
I think, yes, that's capitalism.
Well, right. Okay. So now that we know where this all started, can you give us like maybe the textbook definition of the difference between UX and UI? We hear it thrown about a lot in the industry, and I don't know if everybody clearly understands the difference. What are they? Is it different? Are they the same? Are they two sides of the same coin? Are they a process that links one to the other? What is it?
So UI is a component of UX. So UX is the user experience. It's the holistic approach to everything. So it goes from not just the tangible aspects of the gameplay, but it's looking at who's actually going to be using that product, why are they using it, why are they attracted to this game, right down to the tangibility of the touch and feel of game pieces. So when you're thinking about the UI, that's what you're touching. It's what you're looking at. It's the physical outcome. The user experience is the 90% of everything else that goes around it. So UI is just one small component. User experience also includes like content design that goes into that, content experience, accessibility, all of those components have to work together. And the UX goes from, a lot of that before you even start developing anything on a piece of paper. You're thinking about the user experience, and then it goes through a whole cycle to end up with a developed product. UI should be at certain sections of that whole life cycle where you're coming in and looking at what are you actually developing, what is the look, the feel, the tangibility of the game.
Very cool. Very cool. So for everybody out there in Maple Syrup Land, we see you, we hear you, Jason, Tam, BJ Roses, Amy Bayo, George, Dreyer, Sean Richardson, lots of people out there. If you have questions that you'd like answered, Natalie's here for that. So anything about UX, let's get those questions rolling. Jay Bell, do you have any questions for Natalie right now off the top of your head? You were typing in the chat beforehand in our Facebook chat, and you were talking about this. So what's on your mind?
Yeah, there's a lot of things on my mind on this subject. I think about UX and UI a lot as a game designer and graphic designer, and it's really hard for me to kind of distinguish the two and think about them individually when needed and then together. But as you've been talking, it sounds like you would sort of play a role of like a game developer, asking those questions of why and refining the ideas into a good experience. And you mentioned accessibility, and that made me think about, accessibility from the language standpoint of, board game jargon that we might use and all of those different things. So I guess give us some examples of accessibility for UX and how to improve it.
Yeah. So I'd say for game design, and I should say I am a gateway gamer. I'm not a heavy gamer at all. I'm definitely in the sort of Catan and that level of game.
That's totally fine.
Totally fine.
Yeah.
Anybody who plays any game is a gamer. You're all good.
You were my gateway, so
Yeah, no judgment, no shade.
My husband is a serious gamer, so we have two full rooms of just complete board games, floor to ceiling, around the walls games, and is now annexed our whole cupboard as well with just games. So I'm surrounded by
now.
2 rooms and a hallway. Like honestly, it's phenomenal how many games we have. He really shouldn't be allowed on Kickstarter anymore, but yeah. So we have a lot of games, and one of the key things is actually thinking about accessibility. And I think a lot of people, when they think about accessibility, they think of it's something that you do at the end to make sure it's fit for purpose for a lot of people. If you're thinking about accessibility, this should be something that you are building in right from the start of your design process. And part of that is working out who are you actually designing this game for. If you're designing a one person play a game, and it's only ever going to be played by you, then you are the target audience. If you're expecting anybody else to ever play this game, you need to be thinking about who those people are. So what are the needs of these individuals? What are they going to be looking for when they're playing that game? And you need to specify exactly who your person is as a single individual or a persona of your gamer. And as part of that, that's when you start working in your accessibility needs. So what is their reading level? Is this somebody that's going to be able to sit and read instructions for an hour, or do they want to read instructions for 10 minutes and get a handle on the game? That's going to be a key component. What's their reading level? What are the ages that you're looking for? And ages is always a tough one because it's not, somebody who's 30 could have a reading age of 10. So thinking about reading age rather than
Actual
physical age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's reading age, it's attention span as well. How much attention do these people actually have? How much time do they have to learn a game versus playing the game? What's the playability? How often do you expect people to be picking up these games, and are they going to be expected to remember how to play it versus being able to just have a quick scan of the instructions and go, yeah, I know this is how to do it, or just pick up the box even though they haven't played it in 6 months and they can figure it out because they've played it once. So it's working out all those different sort of needs that your end user is going to have. And then before you even create a single design, that should be who you're referring back to at all times. So it's really, really clearly knowing who is going to be using this at the end of your design phase. Who is going to be buying this? Why are they going to be buying it? And what are their specific needs that are going to feed into everything that you design should be working for this one specific ideal person. And when I say ideal, I don't mean that they're your perfect person. You should be working in those constraints of, how are they actually going to use the game or understand the game. So that's my key thing for accessibility, is making sure that you're thinking about who's going to be using the game, what constraints and needs that they have, documenting it, actually having it somewhere visible so you are referring back to that constantly. And then as you're actually developing that game, going out and testing it with people who meet those criteria. So find people who have the same sort of reading level and attention span and time constraints as the person that you're designing for, and run them through your ideas constantly. Like any sort of design should be iterative. Keep going back to them, make improvements, make changes, and go back and keep evolving.
So one of the discussions I often have with game designers is they go, oh, my target audience doesn't matter. I'm much more interested in developing my game. And I say to them, your target audience is the first thing that you think about. You just don't realize, because as soon as you decide how many players your game has, and that's the first thing that most designers do, how many players is this for? You've already started establishing your audience. Now, is this designed for children or not? Right. So you have now started refining your target audience, and on and on and on. And so if you're thinking, okay, well, this is a gateway game, you have refined your target audience more. Every time you make any of those decisions, you're refining that target audience and you're building the persona. And a persona, I mean, you can, Jason, I see that you're asking how detailed you need to be when you're developing a persona. You also do this for marketing and all kinds of user experience type of things. You can have it as detailed as you like. You can have multiple personas. But one of the things that people tend to skimp on early on is really understanding that customer. And what happens when you do that, Nat? When you just don't develop it enough?
It's basically that comes back to, you can't design for everybody. And if you don't have a distinct persona or person that you're designing to, you're trying to design something for everybody. So it's not going to work. If going back to Jason, with the level that you want to go to, you don't want to go too deep into your personas because you want to have them be realistic. You don't want to just make up a persona. You want to do a bit of research and find out who these people are. I like to have personas being based as one page per persona at most, and that on that one page you're going to identify what their needs are, what pain points they have with other games, what sort of options or needs do they have in terms of this specific thing that you're coming up with, and then what's the minimum viable product or experience that they're looking for. So that's a really key one to sort of give you some constraints. I always go for your one key persona. That's the one who should be, this is their ideal game. This is their ideal thing that they're going to pick up. And then you can have one or two at the most other personas that you want to do your test and validation exercises with to make sure that it's not going to be a bad experience for them if they've got different needs. But they're not going to be your core persona. Your core persona, that's the one who's going to be, this is my favorite game. I'm going to buy this game. It meets all my needs of what I'm looking for in a game. So that's what you want to have really clear, but you shouldn't have it any more than a page, and it's a page that you can stick up on a wall so that when you're doing any of your development, you can just look at it and be reminded, that's who I'm looking for. It's not you. Otherwise, you just end up designing something that meets your needs. You've got to keep going back to the other one.
We're not talking a wall of text page. We're talking bullet points, right? So
bullet points.
For example, maybe the Drarink customer might be someone who is interested in games about nature and who is in their mid-20s to mid-40s or something like that, and who has an income that they can spend on things like board games, and who has a reading level at sort of probably high school level or higher, and who is someone who for whom inclusivity is important, and who is thinking about their other friends that they invite to their game nights and wants to make sure that their colorblind friend can play, and wants to make sure that but they're not necessarily a colorblind person themselves, although we want to make sure that this is colorblind friendly.
So, and when we're talking
as
about
an off-the-cuff persona.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about accessibility, it's good to have sort of a checklist of what you want to check off. Don't build into your personas somebody else. You just want to have your core, that's what this person's needs, and then have that as your secondary person that you go and make sure, does it still work for this person? And then make sure that you only include the details in your persona that are relevant for your game. So there's lots of, if you Google personas, generally what you'll get is a marketing persona, like a market research persona. And that will be things like, this is Sarah, she's 23, she has 2 children, and none of that is actually going to impact what you're doing as a designer. So what is the information that's going to actually impact how you're designing something? So I use attitudinal personas for a lot of the work I do.
Okay.
And it's, how do people think about these things? Like, what is important in terms of how they're thinking? What type of games do they like? So as I said, the sort of games that I like are definitely gateway games. I have done gaming with my husband and his gaming group, where they're spending sort of 90 minutes, 2 hours going through just the rules of the game to start with, and I can't.
And you love it. I see that.
Yeah. What's generally annoying with every time we would do that, I would always end up winning.
Oh, that's the end.
Oh, she's winning. That's it.
She's just going to end up winning. You've frozen that just in case you can hear us. So the marketing persona type of thing is probably... Oh, she's back.
Oh, did I drop out? Sorry.
You froze after you said that you win all the time. All you do is win, win, win.
Oh, yeah. But I win complicated games, and that annoys the, proper gamers who know that I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just guessing because I didn't listen to the rules. I gave up after the first 5 minutes. So understanding that attitude to the game is really important to document in your persona. So what is this person looking for? Are they looking for light entertainment that they're going to pick up when they've got a spare half an hour? Or is this something that they want to spend all day doing with a group of friends? What's their attitude to the games? And this is where you want to be really clear about what type of game are you creating? But look at the different types of games out there and be really clear on when you're been hit by that inspiration stick, documenting what you want to do as your game, but then taking that step back and doing some research into what do people look for in these types of games? Who are the type of people that are attracted to these types of games, and trying to define that. because that's what you want to aim for.
So, for example, if you are building a sort of light strategy game, you might be looking at what a Catan customer is and a Ticket to Ride customer and those types of people, and looking at people who really love those games and building your persona from that. Would that be right?
Yeah.
So people who have an attitude or an attitudinal, what did you call it? Attitudinal persona. So you would build that from people who are well disposed towards Catan and those sorts of games, probably not so well disposed towards Monopoly, but also not really into Gloomhaven.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you actually using the games as starting points might be quite a good way of building it, do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, because you and one thing to be aware of though when you're doing that is to avoid stereotypes, because especially if you're heavily into gaming, you will have already classified people who go for certain types of games. So if I think about people who really love Monopoly, I think about people who don't like other people very much. Because generally that's how, you know.
I actually really enjoy Monopoly. I'm just going to come out there and say it. In the right context. Not playing with my brother. Not you, Steve. Anyway.
Yeah, people get very competitive with that, and I will only play with people who I don't want to be friends with anymore because it always ends badly. But you will have stereotypes with how you think about people who play certain types of games. So you need to be really aware of your bias as well when you're starting to create your personas.
That's a really good one to call out, actually.
Yeah, and everybody has them. Bias is completely natural, and the way to handle that is just being aware of it and going, oh, I've just thought about a Monopoly person.
Or a Warhammer 40k person. Come on, tell me, did anyone not have a neck beard in their Warhammer 40k person?
I don't have a neck or a beard, so. So just to give people a little more ammunition or sources you can go look at, and I talk about this a lot, is if you look up Magic the Gathering's development blogs, Mark Rosewater writes about the psychographic personality types for Magic a lot. And if you go read about them, they started out as 3 different distinct personas, and then eventually, after years and years, Magic has been going on for 30 years, right? So after 30 years, now they have more distinct personas, and those personas are really helping to drive the design process, because every set of Magic cards, basically the design team has to address, will all of the various player personas that we have, or psychographs that they call them, will all of them like this set? Will they find enough value in this set of 150 cards or whatever it is to buy it, to collect it, to play it? Because if they don't, then they don't make the cards, because you can't sell it. You won't sell it to enough critical volume to make your money back, right? So it is very, like, at the end of the day, very marketing and very money-based. But what you're doing is you're tapping into the psychological perspectives of people, the attitudes, like Natalie was saying, of people. Like, I want to use that card because I like whatever it does. Like, I like big stompy cards. I'm a red-green player. I want to go big and have a lot of mana. Sorry, Kat, to cast this spell and do this thing, right? That's Magic. And that specific card would trigger positive emotions in a certain type of player. And enough of the Magic set each individual set has to have some of those cards, because you need to appeal to each of the various psychographic types of players that do play Magic. And so that gives you a really good example of how these types of personas are developed, how these types of personas are used in terms of design, and how they're used in terms of actually marketing. So you'll see all of those things happen. And if you know Magic and you know the various planeswalkers, you can probably understand how that works now, right? That each of the different planeswalkers is actually made up of a combination of the different psychographs, player psychographs, so that you can say, as a Spike is one of the main psychographic names. I would like to play with these 3 or 4 different planeswalkers and then build my decks off of that, right? So anyways, lots of cool stuff. You can go check it out. It's been blogged about for decades and decades and decades and decades. So go read it. Yeah. Yeah, see, Lamarcus is talking about there, like Timmy, Johnny,
Mm.
Spike, etc., etc. There we go with those colors again. You're exactly right. And Jason just
I
posted a
was
link
just
to it.
thinking about that.
Yeah.
Sin, you mentioned how players sort of react to those pieces of magic and how the cards play in the game. And Natalie, you actually talked about how you don't really consider yourself a serious gamer, but you tend to sort of win those games sometimes. What is your experience like when you play those games? What is your user experience like when you're outside of your normal game preference?
Mm, mm. Um, yeah, I can't describe how much I actually hate it. Actually, um, I do not find the challenge. I find it frustrating if I can't understand a game.
Mm.
If I can't understand what is happening or why people are doing certain things. I like a game that you can at least pick up some of the strategy from watching other people play it. I'm a visual person. So if I can't figure out what the strategy is or it just seems random, I find that very, very challenging. So it's, yeah,
Too much
it's
admin, too many moving parts, can't figure out why people are making decisions.
no. And why they're getting upset with me when I make a move and it seems to work. Yeah. Um,
Yeah,
I'm not
that
invited to those games anymore. Anyway,
Sounds like a win-win.
yeah.
it's really interesting. I'm going to be at a convention tomorrow throughout the weekend that'll have tons of play testers trying out different games and things. And I've been thinking about just the different experiences that I've had that my partners have with games like push your luck games or games with a lot of take that or games with sort of delayed rewards. And it's really interesting to think about how all of those different mechanics and game styles have different effects on different players.
Mm.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely tolerances for all those things. Like we talk about very easy tolerance to talk about is like loss aversion, and are people tolerant to that? If they are very tolerant to it, then they'll accept anything that happens to them in a game. Randomness isn't a very big deal to them, but for people who want a lot of control over a situation, that's where somebody just kind of breezing in and doing a move that shouldn't work but seems to work now, and then everybody else duplicates it but it doesn't work for them, blows their mind, and they get really upset about it, and they say Natalie can never play the game again,
Hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
right?
Sadness.
Yeah.
So it's this kind of thing where, yeah, you're right, J Bell, that there's a lot of how people react to different things is sort of inherently like personality based. We can go into the big five someday if you really want to do some psychoanalysis of this. I can do that for you, for different player types and whatnot. But it is inherently kind of who you are. There's a lot of genetic basis in personality. So that's a topic for another day. But yeah, a lot of that. We have some questions, actually, a lot of
Mm.
really thoughtful questions out there. We got a lot of game designers, graphic designers in today. So one question was from Sean Richardson, and Sean asks, are there typically differences or similarities in the psychograph personas for the gameplay look and feel itself and the way the rule book is created, laid out, and designed? Oh, that's a good question. I
That's
actually
a
want to
good
pose that to
question.
you, Kat, because
Okay.
when I think of your style of design, both graphically and game wise, there's a specific target there, right?
Yep.
And I don't necessarily want to say just cozy, but
No,
cozy.
we're cozy adjacent, I would
Yeah.
say. Particularly because a lot of cozy games are intended to have no sort of take thatty kind of aspects, and I'm good with a bit of take that and a bit of aggression and a bit of competition. So it's adjacent, but it's yeah. So for the Dreyer Inc. customer for this particular category of games, I consider that they're the kinds of people, for example, who want their rule book to start with the components and then with the setup and have those on the page facing each other so that as they're opening up the game and they're looking at all the components, they can identify those as they do setup. So they're not going, what the hell is a blah blah card? What's this? What's that? And I also want them to have an instruction that starts them playing. So I don't want them to be reading the whole rule book and trying to figure out how it works. I want them to start working their way through it. So that tells you what weight of game I'm designing when I'm doing that, because you can't do that with a heavy game. People will spend their whole time going, and then I move this one. Okay, yes, but yours is asymmetrical, so yours actually moves the. No, you'll never get that. That'll take 5 times longer to explain. So for me, I think yes, absolutely. The look and feel, the experience, the customer type, those are all deeply intermingled. And that is why when I'm building my game concept and my audience for my game, I go to people who are passionate about my theme, as well as people who are interested in that level of game.
Oh, like you understand your audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
interesting.
Because I start with my audience.
Yeah.
Oh.
Here's a question for Natalie. Natalie, George asks, would you consider the ramp to understanding a rule set part of UX, part of the experience? And if so, do you have any thoughts on how to improve that in games where you might have found that, suboptimal?
Yeah, it's absolutely fundamental. It's such a key part of it. So that's definitely a key part of the experience. A few things. Firstly, go and have a look at the different rule books that similar games have created. Go and find out and do your research into how those rule books were received. Go and watch reviews on the game setup, as many as you can. Bad reviews, good reviews, all the reviews, to find out what people liked and what people didn't like about it. And then
really quickly on that, if you sit in front of a how to play video with the rule book and you notice that the how to play video is dramatically different from the rule book, that's really, make note of that. That's really important. Because the how to play is usually better than the rule book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There's so many different resources out there that you can go and review and just see what's worked and what hasn't worked. And then once you start actually developing your rules, this is when you really want to start getting your persona, your target audience, getting it in front of them and getting them. Don't do a walkthrough. This is the thing that a lot of people fall into, is doing walkthroughs or show and tells where you're stepping people through the game. What you want to do is go, here's the game, give it to them, and get them to tell you what their understanding is. So don't tell people, ask them what they think it means. And
so this isn't quite a blind rules test. This would be the step before you give. So just in case you're not familiar with that concept, one of the things that we do as designers is we just give people the game, the rule book, and we just go, we're not saying anything. And we watch them figure it out. But what you're suggesting is the step before that, right? Where they actually explain it back to us and we find out if they're right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
So, I mean, and this is before you've developed your game. Like, this is when you've written the book. You're not giving them the game. You're not doing game anything.
Oh, okay.
As you are writing each part of it, give it to somebody and go, tell me about this. That's all you need to say. So you don't explain it. You just say, this is for a game I'm working on. What does this mean to you? Tell me about it.
Yeah, that's a really good. That's a really interesting thing, because talk about like desire pathways a lot, which is, if you ever see like the corner of a street where people have just cut across on the lawn and like really ruined some old man's lawn, and the old man's like, get off my lawn. That's a desire pathway. It's like, I'd rather just cut across because I know it's faster for me to do that than to go in straight lines all the time. And I use that a lot in game design, because oftentimes people will just change the order of play on me. The way I wrote it says do it this way, but the way that everybody did it is another way, like something out of order. And if it doesn't change the game entirely, like in a bad way, I'll probably adopt the way that they chose to do it, because that's just intrinsically the most natural way to play the game if I see that happen over several playtests. The way that I prescribed may not actually be that natural. And I want a natural game flow. And this kind of goes towards what Natalie was saying. It's like, what do you assume this is going to do in the game? How do you assume this game is going to be played based on everything you know about games and what this piece looks like, what the words that are written on this game piece, whatever? That can help people think about how the game is played. And if you write the game like they assume it's played, it's going to go that much smoother. So oftentimes I'll go back and change things based on how I see it played out, or what people assume things to be. Not that an assumption is always good, but what if it is? What if that is how it should be, right?
Yeah. And that's a key part of what we do, is watching for those desire lines and shortcuts to figure out what's going to work for people, rather than trying to constrain what people do to make it work for us. You've got to make it work for the people that you're designing for.
Oh, this is a great question. I'm going to ask you, J-Val, as well to get in on this one because you're a graphic designer.
Is
So
that
Joseph,
Joseph's one? Yes.
yeah, Joseph
I was about
Frederick,
to
who's
say that.
also a graphic designer, I think we mentioned that before. He asks about, this is a long question, so I'm not going to read it out verbatim, but he asks about differentiation between like a key term, a keyword term, like scavenge versus draw a card from the deck, or an iconography that shows you that versus a word like, graveyard for your discard pile. When do you think that you should use like highly thematic terms for terms that gamers might already know as something else? When is it a benefit to the user experience? When is it detracting from the user experience? What do you think, Natalie and Jay?
Natalie, I'll let you go first.
Get myself off mute. I think it works if you've got a defined theme that people know, so that if it's really, really defined in terms of, I don't know, if you're creating a game that's around a pop culture movie or something that uses specific terminology, but if you're just coming up with terminology to make it sound different, then you're just going to confuse people. Like, you really want to go back to common terminology. That's not your key takeaway from the game, is a cool word that you're using to label something. So how do you label something? Is it going to make it usable, or is it going to sound cool? Because if it's just to sound cool, it's not going to work.
I personally use it from a thematic integration perspective. So does it enhance the experience of the game, or does it confuse people? So one example, in a game that we're developing at the moment, the discard pile, it's a game about a community garden, is called the compost. And the reason it's called the compost is because you have plant cards and you place them in the compost. And once you've got enough in there, you get food back that you can feed to your plants, your growing plants. So thematically integrated into it, that makes sense, because it's not just a straight discard pile. If it was a straight discard pile, I'd call it a discard pile. That's where I come from on that one.
Yep.
Yeah, Jay, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a balance to it. It's funny that I got this question because Evan actually play tested one of my games where he gave me this exact feedback of, I think the tableau was called the community because you're building a community of cards. And he was like, I don't understand what this is. And it was his first time playing. And even though he's a heavy gamer and he understands what a tableau is and a discard is and all these different things, it didn't make sense to him in the moment. So I think after refining your game to a certain point and maybe getting your rules refined to a certain point, it's easier to kind of give examples and swap out those generic terms that many people are familiar with. And I think it's very important to use those sparingly with lighter games, because gamers who don't know those terms by heart will have a harder time sort of switching their brain twice, so to speak.
Yeah. I think if it's something that's already got a word for it and it's only doing that thing, adding a special thematic word onto it is dumb. Honestly, I think that it's actually putting a barrier in people's way. So calling the discard something else when it's just where you put discarded cards, it's putting a barrier in people's way. But if they're doing something there or something extra is happening, if you call it discard and it's not just discard, then you're also putting a barrier in people's way because they think that it's just discarded and it's actually, for example, compost.
Yeah, so it's still in the gameplay. So it's all part of the mental load. So are you adding extra mental load? If you are, then you really have to ask why you're doing that. What's the outcome?
Yeah.
That's
So
a great way of putting it.
I follow a +1 rule usually with naming. If it does one more thing than the thing that I called it originally was supposed to do, then maybe I'll make up a new name for it. Maybe. But a lot of times I name things specifically because I want to talk about that thing in a deeper way than reiterating the entire text of that card. So if you saw a card and on the card it said, draw 3 cards, then discard 2 and play 1, and pay 2 components for it, or whatever it said. I would rather just call that something thematic, like I don't know. Let's say it's a
The
scavenge.
pirate card.
Yeah,
or
the
whatever.
pirate card.
Yeah.
Let's talk about pirate. Let's talk about the pirate card. But because it takes a bunch of things and compacts it into one term, that's why I would do that. If it was literally just draw a card, I'm not going to name that a thematic name necessarily. I probably wouldn't use it in that space, to be honest. But that's how I'm thinking. It's like, does it do more than just the word itself? Then we'll add on to that word, and that's like chunking information, compartmentalizing information, putting more information into one name so that you can refer to that name and understand it means this bigger set of information. So that's kind of my rule of thumb is usually +1, if not more. It needs to have
And
more to be warranted naming
one
something
thing that's
special.
really interesting actually is when people derive their own nicknames for parts of a game. So you'll hear people who play a game regularly and they'll talk about the such and such. And it's not called that in the rules, but they always call it that. Like, I don't know, the yellow bird or something. And it's oh no, you got the yellow bird, or you got the death bird, or the whatever. And people go, oh, that's not actually what it's called, but everyone knows what you mean when you talk about the yellow bird. And that kind of segues quite well into what Amy's saying. Is it called a desire path when community makes their own way? For me, that sort of leads into, what about house rules?
What about house rules?
Mm,
That's
What
a great
about house
question.
rules? Yeah.
I think from a user experience perspective, house rules are like the ultimate, right? Because they are trying to make the experience better for their own tables.
Yeah.
And all the power to people who make house rules. My only caveat, and I've said this a bazillion times, is please don't rate my games based on your house rules. That's it.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's if people are getting a product and they're just changing it to make it work perfectly for them, then there shouldn't be a problem with that. It's
Mm.
customization is just part of the process. But you can
Uh,
learn from that as well. That's when you
exactly.
can find out what they're doing. Why are they actually doing that?
Sometimes the house rules are actually the improvement that you didn't know you needed to make. And sometimes they just didn't read all of the rules and they made something up and they're wrong.
Here's a good question. So Lamarcus asks, is there
Mm.
no universal best way to lay out a rule book? Oh,
I'd love to take that question.
you want to
Go
take it? Go
for
ahead.
it.
I think the best way to lay out a rule book is the way that works for your audience. But no, there isn't
Yeah.
one specific way. I think there's a lot of guides that have become familiar, right? And that's what will help your experience is familiarity. But no, I mean, there's too many different types of games for there to be one best way.
Hmm. Natalie, what
I
do you
think
think?
It would be a risk to have a one best way to lay out something, because then it's not going to be, you're going to be trying to fit whatever you're doing into a defined constraint. But there's the best way is, again, go out and look at other people's rule books who have done something similar. What are the similar things that they're doing? What are the similarities in the way they've set them out? And then go and test it, see what, if this actually works, or watch the reviews and see, well, that doesn't make sense doing it in this order. What does make sense for the type of game that you're creating?
so. That's actually a really interesting topic. But Jay Cormier did something on this at TokenCon, and I would say yes, to a certain extent, there is a universal best way to lay out a rule book in that it follows the way that you learn the game. But much more importantly than that, it should teach you exactly how to play the game in the same way as that whole. Does everyone know the video with the man getting
The
his
peanut
kids
butter?
to do
Yeah.
the peanut butter? Yeah, so Jay used that as
Yeah.
an example. Are you familiar with that, Nat?
No.
He basically tells his children to write the instructions for a peanut butter sandwich, and then he does exactly what they wrote.
Oh, wow.
And it's hilarious because, things like spread the peanut butter on the bread, but they haven't told him to open it or use a knife or anything. So he just takes the jar and he goes,
Mhm.
and things like that. Or using the knife, spread the peanut butter on the bread. So he sticks the knife into it, and then he's still got the jar on the knife and he's spreading it. And that, I think, is a really interesting thing to bear in mind.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about. I think there are best practices for all of this stuff, but I wouldn't be so bold as to say my way is the right way or there's only one way, because
This is the only way.
yeah, there's a lot of ifs, then, and buts about different games and how different games are played. So a much simpler game, you can get away with a lot of stuff. A more complex game, you might have to be really procedural about how you lay it out. I'd actually think it's more about hierarchies than it is about layout, right? It's about how do you define information in a way that is readable and necessary, but then there's also this other stuff that you might need some other times, these edge cases. I'd also say that there's ways to design all of that out right from the get-go. Like, you can redesign your game so you don't need any of that stuff. But then is it the same game, or does it have as much flavor? I don't know. That's up to you to decide. But there are ways to conform to very specific rules, layouts, if you build a very specific type of game.
But that's a
that's
good
not
point,
necessarily the best
though.
game. Yeah.
If you have to spend like 2 extra pages in your rule book to explain one thing, that thing, why is it there?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I would say save that for the expansion, if ever there is one.
Yeah, or just kill your darlings.
Yeah.
That one's over.
Sean Richardson says that rulebook testing is as important as playtesting of your game, in my opinion. I actually think it is one and the same as playtesting your game. Like, without a rulebook, there is no game, right? There's just pieces that you move around. It's the rules that are the actual game. So yes, I agree with you. And I would say it is quintessential that if you do not test your rulebook, you do not know how it's going to perform out there in the wild when you're not there. And that is where all the vagaries, like all the questions that get asked on BGG on a daily basis, thousands and thousands of questions, are literally because the rule books are great, because language is vague. And it's, I mean, even the people who make the, how to play videos, they get errors, they make mistakes. And now everybody's replicating that mistake until the publisher says, I guess that's the way it is.
That's the new rule. It's fine. This is how you play now.
It's so important
to Kate Finch.
Hi, Kate.
Sorry, go ahead, Natalie.
It's why it's so important to do iterative testing. So you're not just doing game testing, you're doing it through the entire process, right from your when you first come up with your idea, go out and test the idea, then test the rule book. As you start writing rules, go and start bouncing them off people. It should just be a constant process, because you can never have too much feedback. That's, you just want to have constant information coming in about what you're designing.
So just to explain that, just in case, iterative means making lots of small changes rather than building your entire game and then testing the whole thing in a great big gigantic chunk and then going, So lots of small over and over. So a good thing to do is to actually note every version, just like you do with software testing. I think that's really useful for game design. Kate, by the way, is also very passionate about UX and is stoked that we are doing this episode. So, yeah. Kate's an Aussie too. You remind me of each other. I think you would get on really well.
Awesome.
There you go.
Yep.
Very nice. So we have about 10 minutes left in the episode. I'm sure there are more questions out there. If you have more questions, please do ask them. We have an expert here on UX research. So in terms of other things that we're talking about in user experience, how do people who aren't as well versed as you, Natalie, in user experience research, how do they go about collecting this data? What should they do? Which kind of questions should they ask? Where should they look? Do we videotape everybody? What do we do?
So you need to...
sorry, you've been called out. Hold on. Go ahead.
Yeah, there we go. All right.
Okay, sorry. On to your question.
So basically, there's the key thing is finding your people to give you feedback that match your persona, your target demographic. But then there's the key thing is you should be trying to not do the talking when you're with these people. And then
that's hard.
Yeah. But this is the thing, is if you're doing the talking and you're telling them what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve, you're not going to get the right amount of feedback. So you're not going to get honest feedback, and you're going to get people telling you what you want to hear. That's not beneficial in the outcome. You can't. You have to be neutral. You have to go in and say, be honest. Honest feedback is what I'm looking for. Can you tell me about this? So the key questions that when you're going and getting any feedback on anything at any stage of your design development is give them something. Say, this is the rule book for this section of the game. Can you tell me about it? So don't tell them anything else. Just, can you tell me about this? And then when they give you an answer, go, oh, okay, can you tell me a bit more about X, Y, Z, whatever it is? So you want to build out a big picture. So you want to keep asking questions, keep probing to find out. Say, I didn't really understand this bit. Okay, can you tell me a bit more about that? Okay, why? What wasn't working for you? So we also have a thing called the 5 whys. So you should have at least 5 times where you can probe on a question to get to the level of detail that you'll need. So you can say why 5 times, or you can just say, tell me something about X, Y, Z, and then ask them to give you a little bit more detail. Be specific. Tell me what's not working around this one. Always then also one of my best questions is to ask, if someone goes, no, this is great, then say, okay, but if you could change one thing, what would you change?
Yeah.
Because that's your sort of magic wand question. If you could change something about this, what would you change? That's when people go, oh, yeah, it was good, it worked. However, I would change this. So always go back and say, if you could change one thing. So my key bits of information is, tell me about something, and then what would you change? So you can get everything out of those 2 questions, and then probe, ask why with whatever their answers are. If you're asking a question and they can answer a yes or no, does this work for you? Yes. Then you haven't gotten any value out of that question.
Open
Can
questions.
you tell me about this? Yeah. Always got to be, if you can answer yes or no to it, the question's not going to give you value. So it has to be something that you cannot answer yes or no about.
So in sales, what they teach you to do is ask open questions and gradually narrow things down, and then check whether that's correct by asking closed questions to confirm. So an open question can't be answered with yes or no. A closed question is a yes or no only, if that's helpful for people. That's a good one, Kate. What do you know now that you wish you'd known at the start?
Yeah,
I think for rules, that's a great one.
Or for like when you've played through the game, it's always useful to be like, what did I miss?
Yeah. What questions do you have? So.
One that I find really useful from games specifically is, so before we're going into feedback and before I say the answer to them, because I keep track of this stuff, it's like, okay, so how much time do you think you spent playing on the game? Like how much time do you think the game took us to play? And they'll give me the times, I'll write that down. And I'll tell them what the real time was. And some people are very surprised by, oh, I thought we played for a lot longer. Oh, it felt like a lot longer than that, which is a bad thing, right?
Make a note of that.
Yeah, you make a note of that. If like, it was only half an hour, but they felt that they've been toiling over this game for an hour and a half. That's a sign that maybe something's wrong. And the other question I asked before we tally score, if there's a score, is, okay, based on how people played, who do you think is going to win this game and why? And that's very specific for game design, because I want to know what behaviors they think should have won the game based on the premise, the rules, the mechanics that they already know. And this is very much that kind of thing where at the end of the game, if you feel like somebody else won and you should have won, or that you won but you didn't think you deserved it, that's not a fair game. That's why a lot of people actually play board games, is because they're set up to be as fair as possible. They should be, right? Where no matter who you are, you should be able to sit down at a game and play it to some level of competence, depending on the game. It's not like a sport like basketball, where I'm 5'2". Doesn't matter how much I love basketball, I am not going to beat somebody who is 7'4" 4 at basketball if they also have the exact same skills in every other area as me, right? So I think those two questions help me a lot. And I also use a different, well, actually, it's almost exactly the same as Natalie's magic wand question. We use it from solution focused therapy. We do the same thing where it's like, okay, so if you could change, or if one thing could be just 5% better than it is right now, what would that be? It doesn't have to be
Mm.
perfect. It just is what could be better, because all I want to do is make improvements in my design in an iterative fashion. Like 5% is better than what it was before. Doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be 100%. And a lot of people can't actually think in 100% because they're not designers. They're just
Hmm.
people who play games. And they're not going to be able to tell you an answer that completely solves everything. But they'll tell you something that gets you closer. And that's worth a lot, right?
One thing we used to get asked a lot was, what if 5 out of 5 is the best score something can have, and you were going to give this a 5 out of 5, what would a 5 look like?
Yep.
Like how would you get it to a 5? And that was always really interesting. I haven't tried that with games, but you just made me think of it there. I saw a question, oh yes, about unnecessarily large rule books. So
Yes.
how do you feel about unnecessarily large rule books that take up the whole box? Holding a giant rule book at the table can be a real hassle. Yes, that's one of the accessibility things we need to think about. Big rule books, tiny components, all of those sorts of things. That's certainly something, like if we're trying to keep it as a small box game, we need to understand that we are excluding people who can't handle small fiddly things. And if we're trying to have gigantic rule books because we want to look cool or we want to have a lot of art in it, we need to understand that people who have trouble holding giant rule books are going to have issues. What do you reckon, Nat?
I mean, as soon as you say unnecessary, that's your key score. Like,
Yeah.
what is in there that you don't need? Because it's as soon as there's stuff in there that's not necessary and it's not adding to the experience, then it needs to go. And that's where it gets hard, because when you're designing something, you get very attached to it, and it's perfect for you. That's why going out and testing is so important, because when you give it to somebody and go, wow, this is really big, I can't hold it, then you have to deal with that feedback. You can't ignore that. But if you're just going, well, but it looks so pretty and it feels so nice, that's awesome. Make a copy for yourself and keep the really big version. That's not what goes in the box.
Yeah, if it means that you need a second table or an extra chair to hold the rule book because there's not enough room for it on the table with the game, maybe make better decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's another
and-
question. George asks,
Oh,
could you rank the various ways to differentiate between similar visual elements? Jay, I think this is a good question for you. So color, shape, pattern, etc. in an interface by order of effectiveness. Oh, that's an interesting ask, George. I'm not actually sure if there actually is a hierarchical order of effectiveness, because it's dependent on the project, but there are many different things, right?
Yeah, I would agree with you, Sin. I haven't ever looked at them in a extremely comparative way, but considering like color deficiencies and accessibility there, I would say probably shape over pattern, just because there's a little more there's more options there, and then color falling behind. But yeah, it definitely kind of depends on what you're working with, the number of different things you have, and yeah.
the complexity of the pattern would, and of the shape, I suppose, would also make a difference, wouldn't it? Like,
Oh, for
if
sure,
it's
right?
square, circle, triangle
That's
versus
easy.
plaid and grids and things that will screw with people's eyesight. And
Yeah, and I think that goes back to Natalie's comment a while back about just complexity and cognitive load, right? The differentiation between a hexagon and an octagon isn't initially visually very easy for some people to tell, right? Just like the difference between, I don't know the plaids because I'm not Scottish, but the different plaids are actually very different from each other, but you don't know unless you know.
yeah,
So the same thing with pattern. I would say there are definitely patterns, like crosshatch versus vertical lines and horizontal lines. Those are opposites, sorry. And dots or polka dots. Like you can get enough zip tone type patterns that if you have very limited amount of information, you should be able to do it. So partially it's about what fits in that icon, what that icon's about. partially it's about, how complex do you want this to look? And how different can you allow it to look while still feeling right? So I think you're right, Jay, that shape and color have a higher just resonant value. I don't think that's a term, but I'm going to use it anyways. With people, as soon as they see it, they know that's what it is. But you can only go so far before you have shades of color that are very similar to each other, or shapes that are like, this is a 9-point object or a 10-point object. I don't know anymore. So we've got a limit. There's a hard limit. And that's a cognitive perceptual thing. Our brains just won't discriminate at a certain level.
And it depends on the size of it as well, right? Like if it's one of 20 different icons on your tiny little card.
As a subset, yeah. If there's 20 different icons, does it matter how many different types you have? It's going to be difficult to differentiate just because of there's a subset of 20 that your brain has to parse. It won't work that well. Oh, this is Joel, who is Kate's partner, who's also great with graphic design and UX UI, says that everyone's idea of necessary varies. So for some people, large text is vital. To some people, it's a waste of space for others. He's going back to the rule book size thing, but it's the same thing with like visual hierarchies of information for things like iconography, patterns, shape, color. Like you can talk about rhythm, you can talk about spacing, you can talk about orientation. There's all sorts of, there's like 6 to 7 or 8, depending on what school of thought you go to for graphic design and all those elements and their hierarchies. But there are definitely weaker ones and there are definitely stronger ones. And some of them just don't play well in a 2.5 by 3.5 poker card. They just don't work that well because there's not enough space to visually differentiate while still having enough information to be functional, right?
And
that must be a huge problem, Jay.
Speaking of the different cards, it's interesting that even just like the difference between a poker card and a bridge card, which is like 1/4 of an inch or something, I think, is just, it's dramatically different in how well you can hold them in your hand and how well you can read the information. What do you think about that, Jay? In terms of like card layouts and
it's really interesting because there's debate of whether or not cards of different sizes in the same game are more effective than cards of the same size, right? There's manufacturing and like product efficiencies to think about, but then also there's the UX to think about of whether or not your player, your persona prefers to be able to distinguish those different cards, maybe action cards versus event cards by size, or if it makes them feel better to know that they're all the same size and that doesn't kind of break up their cognitive sort of train, right? I prefer larger cards personally. I love the way tarot cards shuffle, and I think it's mostly because I have trouble shuffling smaller cards, right? Even poker size, and that's a UX thing for me, right? I like larger cards, so I think it definitely depends. Huh?
And you cannot lie.
Right.
Sorry, I'll just derail you there. The reason I'm asking is because there's always debate about if the card is in your hand, which format should you use?
Yeah, that question is one that I'm actually thinking about right now, because for like a deck builder, maybe it is more important to have that information in the upper left-hand corner so that you can display it and see it. But for a game that's mostly drafting and, I don't know, tableau building, maybe it's a little less important because the cards spend more time on the table where they're completely visible.
So you want them to be bigger at that point. You don't need to worry about holding them in your hand and all those sorts of things. Yeah,
there's a lot of functionality to think about.
Oh yeah, tons. That's why my first question to anybody when they ask AB on any forum is like, well, what are these used for?
Yeah.
You'll see me ask that question all the time, and almost nobody ever gives me an answer.
Yeah.
And so half the answers are going to be wrong because you don't know how that card is used. If you don't know how the card is used, how can you give feedback about whether the graphic design is good or not? You really literally cannot. Not in a useful way anyways. Anyway.
Yeah.
And what size will the card be as well? Like if people just say, which of these card layouts do you prefer? Well, is it a mini card? And is it going to be on the table? Because none of them, I can't read that. I can barely read it now on my phone. Like, no. But if it's a tarot card or something, or a jumbo card, then yeah, go nuts. That's fine.
And that's where you want to do your experimentation. Like, print them out, give them to people, see what they do. Just watch people and how they react to a different size card.
Yeah, how do they
Yeah.
use them functionally, right? We have a question from Ammon. Ammon asks, do you guys have any specific tools for breaking down complex ideas and concepts in rules? That's a really interesting question. I have to think about, like, when you mean tools, like I don't use Chat GPT or anything like that. I don't know. I don't know. Kat, what do you think? Any tools?
So from a business analysis perspective, what I do when I have complex things to communicate is I break the sentence down to only have one verb in it. And I try and use the simplest verb with the shortest length that I can find. And so
That's a
I'm
great
only
idea,
ever
actually.
using one verb in each sentence. I don't, if I need to put anything in brackets, it's too complicated. That's my tool, basically. One
Jay,
verb.
you had a thought.
Yeah.
Are you okay?
When I read Amon's question, I immediately kind of jumped to visuals. I'm also a visual learner, and yeah, visual examples is what I use. And what I really love that some rule books do and some companies do is they allow the visual examples throughout the rule book to build on one another. So you're learning about sort of the
Stepwise,
same
yes.
game as it's happening, and it's great.
And you can follow along with this player in this first part of the turn did this, and then later in the turn they did this other thing.
Yep.
Yeah, I would use examples. I would not just do the visuals. I would annotate and notate and like describe what's happening in that visual with words, very simple words. I would make like very clear who the players are, not just player A and player B, but this is Annie and this is Beth and this is you know, Ching Lu, somebody with a totally different background and name, and show the diversity through all
Yay.
things, right?
Yep.
So yeah, I think using all the tools you have at your disposal will help make the game clearer. And back to what Kat said before, I follow the same rule of writing rules, that if it takes me longer to explain it in words than it does in a picture, I might actually just not have it in the game anymore. I might just cut it because it seems to be something that is not useful or easy to understand. And if it's just going to cause errors, then I need to redesign it somehow.
One of the other tools that I use, again, as a business analyst, one of the first things that I have to do is gain understanding from everyone, make sure we're all on the same page. So if I'm using words of any sort that may be difficult to understand for some users, I have a glossary. And depending on whether, so one of my games has a lot of Maori words in it. So I put that at the end, because that's just stuff people want to look up and, you know, find out a little bit more about. But if I've, for example, as Lamarcus has mentioned, orthogonal, if I'm going to use orthogonal, because it means I don't have to use 15 words to explain, okay, so it's the opposite of diagonal, but also it's like, it basically means you can, oh my God, orthogonal, it's already there, it exists, it's a great word. I'm just going to put orthogonal in there. I'm just going to put in brackets, explain it once, and then carry on using orthogonal.
Yeah.
That's a tool. A glossary is a tool.
Yeah.
Explain some words.
And I think if you lay out your rule books where you can have like sideboards or call out boxes or marginalia, all these things that you've seen in textbooks from the day you were in school to the day you graduated, they're there for a purpose, right? They are best practices in writing and in teaching pedagogically, like how you teach somebody how information processes. They're there for a reason. So follow those. Some really good examples are Ravensburger rules, Aliyah rules, they're the same company. They usually have very good marginalia. So if you want to look up some of that, that's good stuff there. Here's a question for Natalie. Jason Tam asks, what are the key UX questions to solve when determining whether the game is fit for release? All right, so a product, we want to release it. how do we know? What questions do we have to answer?
So when you've go back to the start of when you're thinking about coming up with a game, that's when you should be writing the questions that you need to answer to know when it's fit to release. So what was your opportunity? Who is your target audience? What was your business objective? And then look at your persona. So what were the needs? What did they want to do? All of those things that you defined right at the start. Then when you're to know whether it's fit to release, you need to go back and go, this is the product that I've developed. Now, looking at all those criteria that I did right from the start, does it meet them? If it doesn't, then you've got some questions to ask.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
One of the other things people often talk about is checking it against your vision for the game, which is a different thing from what you're talking about. So the vision for me is much more about the experience rather than the product, but it's all part of the user experience. But checking against the product is that's really useful because that's a measurable, that's a deliverable that I have met. I love that.
So I think if Jay Bell, there is definitely a Panda speech panel product show that is like designing with a product in mind, right? Or designing with manufacturing in mind. All those things are really different things and important. Designing with an experiential vision in mind is separate, but also part of the same thing. And so I think a lot of times when we're talking to novice designers, new designers, maybe people who are doing very boutique things where they're the self-publisher and they're doing it themselves, and they don't care if they profit or not, and they don't have anybody to answer to, they don't have any head count to pay and HR terms and blah, 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 blah. You don't care as much. But when you care about this in a professional way, not saying that other people aren't professional, but I have to deliver as a person who is freelance to very big companies and does work with like multi-million-dollar IPs. I have to deliver something that will sell. And so I have product outlines in my brief. My brief is basically, you need to make a game that is playable by X number of players, age this to this, plays in this amount of time, and all those things are given to me. And then from there, I develop a vision document about experience. And then we talk to manufacturing about, okay, so how many pieces can we have? You know, what if we want to make a card game? What's our limit on cards? And then at the end of it, we go back and we do the checklist. Did we do this? And sometimes we find out that, oh, we missed out on this one. Back to the drawing board. And it's not like something we do right at the end. We do this. We basically, every milestone, we check. And we
So
make
that's
sure.
the iterations.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That's being iterative about it.
100%. So a lot of those tools, we can use. Jay?
Oh, I was going to say, as we've been talking about this, you bring up a really good point, and there's so many different sort of perspectives that you to think about the game from. You know, the manufacturing perspective, the product perspective, the vision perspective, the audience perspective. That's why there's so many iterations of it, and it makes me think about something we discussed when we were doing our game jam, right? There's just a lot of different ways you have to think about the game. And having the barriers that you mentioned, you know, when you receive sort of an IP and they give you these outlines, it's better than sort of not having any to answer to. You know, it gives you a little more structure. It lets
There's definitely clarity. There's definitely clarity.
Yeah, it gives you a road to walk down.
Then the game that you've been making from the game jam would never exist, right? So pros and cons.
It's true. It's true.
Right? Because when you're given this unfettered, unrestricted, make whatever you want, here's a couple little constraints that have nothing to do with budget or anything like that. What did you make? You make this really cool game that, you know, it's cool.
Are you familiar with the game jam, Nat? Do you know what a game jam is?
No.
It's basically where a bunch of designers get together and they get some ideas thrown at them. And those ideas can be, here are 3 dice and a piece of paper, come up with a game. Or they can be, you've got dice drafting and pine trees, and you're not allowed to have cards. And then you've got 10 minutes, an hour, 2 days, come up with a game. That's a game jam. Yeah.
Awesome.
So, but here's what I want to do. I want to invite Natalie back for the next game jam, but have her provide personas.
Ooh, that would be
fun.
so cool.
Right? It's a different game.
I
It's a
would
different
love
jam.
that. That's the kind of jam I'm into.
Interesting.
Mm.
Joseph Frederick has a great point. This is one I've been like screaming from the mountaintops for like a decade and a half now. Is
I've
player
got
aids.
yes.
Player aids are wonderful. So Joseph, you're entirely right. If you have more than a few action options and more than a few icons, and you might want to put your scoring on there, make a player aid. I actually don't write rules for my games. I make player aids because the player aids generally don't change that much from iteration to iteration, but the rules and the order of things might, and I might need to change that. It's easier for me to change a player aid than it is to rewrite the
Yes.
words of a rules. Because rules are fairly ephemeral in my design process until I kind of lock them all down. So I also highly suggest this. I think this is a great response. And a lot of people are like, yes, I agree. Uh, you know, gameplay slows down when you don't know what your options are and when you don't know
Mhm.
what your icons mean and all that kind of stuff.
I use
Um,
player aids to test my rules actually. Like
yeah.
if someone is asking for a player aid, I test that player aid against my rules. Have I actually covered what they asked me for? Do they just need reminding, or was it not there? And sometimes it wasn't there.
Right. Well, sometimes the things that we think are 100%, oh, that's just everybody knows that. They don't, right?
Of course, that's what I meant when I said shuffle the
Yeah.
cards. Of course, I meant deal them out.
The funniest thing you'll find is that if you start designing games for children, is that you'll realize that kids don't know how to hold cards. Kids don't know how to roll dice. It's not something we're born intrinsically knowing. They have to be taught that. And so sometimes you have to explain it because sometimes you'll get people from cultures where games aren't something that is a thing, not board games. All cultures play games in some way, shape, or form, but they don't all interact with cards or dice the same way that we do, right?
Or
So
even
those are thoughts.
cultures could just be someone whose family doesn't do that.
Exactly.
It's as simple as that. Like,
Yep. For whatever reason.
mm.
Sean Richardson says, I want to game jam with you guys, and you are totally invited to do that. Whenever we do a game jam, we do it live on air. We've only really done one. We'll do another one, though.
We
We do it
will.
live on air, and we'll have all the constraints and all the limits and all that kind of stuff. We usually do it within the time span of the show, so it's usually about an hour, 45 minutes. And we've come up with some cool things from there. Jay's game is probably the one that's gone the furthest in terms of he's taken it further than most of us have gone with our little ideas or nuggets. But I still have a picture right over there that I drew the day that we were talking about it. It's like I want to make that game. I just haven't found the time yet. So yeah, we'll have
Yeah,
a game
so
jam in the new semester.
play along
Sorry,
with us at home.
teacher
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah.
Speaking of semesters, I guess this is, we're coming up to a month away from summer, which means that Kat and I will take a break in the summer for 2 months. There'll be no show. And then we'll start a whole new cycle starting in September of 2023 until the same time, June of 2024. So in those 10 months, we need 40 guests and 40 topics. If you have ideas of what you want to see, who you want to see, past guests, totally valid. I want Natalie to come back and help us with the next game jam, for example. Get at us. Get at us on Twitter. Get at us on Facebook, etc., etc. Talk to us about the types of topics and people and
And if
guests
it's
that you want to
you,
see.
it can be you too. If you want to be a guest, tell
Yeah.
us. We
Yeah. Hey, this is a good question. Who is going to be at Origins?
Both of us.
We are. Jay, are you not going to be there?
I am actually going to be in the UK still.
Oh,
so,
okay.
yeah.
Well, see,
How
that's
dare.
different. Like Jay will be at UKGE this weekend if
Mhm.
y'all are there. So
Oh,
there you
that's
go.
the convention you're going to this weekend. How exciting.
Yeah.
It'll be fun.
Coolness.
Yes, and so Ammon is going to be there. George is going to be there. Amy is yelling at you, Jay. See, look, Jay. And I offered this on Twitter, so I'll just put it out there right now that there's a whole bunch of kerfuffle like last week about, well, okay, to lay the groundwork, Elizabeth Hargrave, who is the designer of Wingspan, laid out some data about Spiel des Jahres and just that, hey, it's been not a lot of women or people who are femme presenting who have won or even been nominated for the Spiel, which is like the kind of pinnacle of awards in tabletop, in hobby anyways, in hobby gaming. And the amount of feedback that she got was awesome and ridiculous all at the same time. Where some guys, even from the industry with very high positions in the industry, kind of gave her this weird feedback about stuff, which I won't get into here. We can talk about it some other place. But because of that, we realize that people who are marginalized for whatever reasons may have difficulty getting to conventions. So I'm here to offer up my services and unpaid, no strings attached. If you are a designer who cannot get to Origins and you have a connection that you want to make with a publisher who might be at Origins, I will gladly, help you do that. If it's introducing you to them, if it's taking your game to them, if it's teaching them your game, whatever it is, that would be my honor and privilege to help you if I can. Okay, so get at me if you need me. Other than that, we'll talk to you in a bit about that. Joseph Frederick will be there. He'll be at Origins for Ludimus Games.
Nice.
And Amy will, of course, be there. That's why she asked and why she's yelling at Jay. Kirsten Lund is at WellyCon, which is this weekend, for those of you in New Zealand. And Jay is going to be UKGE, which is in Birmingham.
Weekend.
Yeah, this weekend. That's the answer to this question. All right, so we are an hour and 20 minutes, which is probably way too long for Natalie to stay with us and listen to all our geek talk. Did you have fun, Natalie, though? Oh,
yeah,
I think she's
absolutely. Okay. And used to the geek talk.
That's true.
Yes.
There you go. Well, you are friends with Kat, so I get it. I get it.
Actually, I'm pretty sure you were referring to Alex, weren't you?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. My husband.
That was not about me.
Alex is your partner.
But thanks for
All
assuming
right.
it was about me.
Well, I think you're a great geek. Geeks are awesome.
Geeks good.
I love geeks.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So George says thank you, and we all thank you for coming. If you want to reach
thanks so
me,
much.
reach out at Senfeng Lim on Twitter. Catherine, where are you?
Drea Inc. on all the things.
Drea Inc. on all the things. And you can find us both at Meeple Syrup on the things. Hey, Nat, if people want to get a hold of you for some expertise in UX and things like that, I know you're on a secret project right now, but, where can people find you?
On LinkedIn. Just drop me a line on LinkedIn. Always happy to answer questions or ask questions.
There you go.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And Kirsten's saying that it was an awesome topic and Natalie has been fantastic and that she took oodles of notes. There you go. Jay Bell, where can people find you?
I am DJ Bell on pretty much all social media, primarily Twitter, but you can also find me at conventions all summer. I'll be around. I'll be at Gen Con in August, so yeah.
Yay!
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yay! We get to meet IRL.
Yeah. That's gonna be fun.
Amazing.
And Jay is also works for Panda Games as are you pre-press graphic design? Is that what you do? I don't know.
I am a pre-press specialist at Panda Game Manufacturing and taking on some more roles. And I'll just say keep an eye out because we got a whole lot of stuff coming this summer.
Ooh.
That's right. And if you want to reach out to Fertessa, who is not here today, you can reach her at Fertessa. She is the only one we know. She also, congratulations to Fertessa, she just got a job at Pokemon
She
North
caught
America.
them all.
Yeah, which is awesome. And so that's where she is tonight. She's at a launch event for Pokemon with the rest of our friends like Tim and Banana and Andrew, who are also at Pokemon. And if you want to support us at all, you can find us at patreon.com/meeplesyrup and help keep the lights on. That's how we got equipment for Kat. How we're going to do some stuff at conventions and all that kind of stuff. I will bring out my road rig to Origins and to Gen Con. We'll do some recording. It'll be fun. It'll be awesome.
Yay.
All right. And on that note, Natalie, I hope you remember that you are down to give the final advice. Dun, dun, dun.
Awesome. Well, my final advice is ask questions and throughout your entire design, keep asking questions. Ask questions of who's actually going to use this? Why are they actually using it? Then watch them. Don't tell people how to use your game. Give them the game and see how they use it. So get constant feedback, iterate, and ask why the whole way through. And make sure that whenever you're designing for somebody, it's documented, it's written down, and it's stuck up where you can refer to it constantly so you don't forget and keep, as soon as you start designing without keeping who your end audience is in mind, you're designing for you. So you've got to have something to reference back to and refer back to your, I call it an opportunity canvas. You can look up opportunity canvases, but document what your idea is, but then how does it fit into what is the opportunity? Who is your customer? Why are they the customer? What type of game is it? Document all those things, but in a really high level way so that you're constantly referring back to it and keeping it as your North Star. What are you actually building it? Why are you building it? Refer back to these things all the time.
Excellent, excellent,
That's
excellent. I just want
brilliant.
to put a little caveat there. There are definitely designers out there. I know Ammon is one of them who designed his game specifically for himself because he was at that time in life where he needed to design that very specific game. It just happened, Ammon, that you hit on something that a lot of people needed, or we figure a lot of people are going to need because it hasn't been published yet. But there's some word on the street about that one. But we're not all going to luck into that. And sometimes thoughtful design, where we design like from the get-go with design principles in place, with personas in place, with an understanding in place, with, in my case, a design brief handed to me by somebody, we're going to get out of it what we want at the end. Is it going to be necessarily as artful and artistic? I don't know. I don't think so. It's definitely more on the product design side of thing, but also it's going to be consistent. And that's this other thing. When you are a professional in the space, I've been doing this for 15 years. I have to be consistent. I cannot not be consistent, right? My livelihood depends on it. So there's a difference.
How you get paid.
It's a difference, right? And that's okay. It can be that way. And for people who are making art more than they're making product, I love those are the ones that I actually support more on Kickstarter because they are weird and wonderful. And we don't get weird and wonderful out of something that somebody gave me a brief because I have to fit it to that product line. So I value the weird and wonderful. But you can still use a lot of the processes that Natalie described and that we described over the course of the show to get to a place in a way that might suit you better and serve you better and have you answering the questions that you're asking as opposed to just being left with the, will anybody even like this question that
Or never
a lot of people
ever
get.
finishing it.
Also,
That's one way you can finish that game.
Yeah. And then let it go if it doesn't do anything. And that's also fine. Sometimes just getting it done is a triumph in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
All right. So what is coming soon? Let's see here. Oh, big.
Oop.
So I can read it. How come it's so small? Normally it goes like full screen. What's going on here? Oh, maybe if I do this. I don't know.
Could be that.
Still not as big. They must have changed some parameters. But anyways, so on June 7th, we have Anna Marie Phelps coming. She is from the Pacific Northwest, out by Cat, and she is starting a small publishing company called Violet Daisies. And we're going to have her coming on the show to talk about how to start a small publishing company. What's coming up after that, Kat?
So on June 14th, we have the lovely Nicole Amato from Kickstarter, who is going to be giving us a masterclass on how we can help Kickstarter help us. So best practices for being the best Kickstarter you can.
Yeah. And Nicole really wants to learn what new designers, new producers, new creators need to do better. Because she wants you all to do as well as you can. Because in the end, that just really does help Kickstarter's bottom line, to be completely blunt and honest about it. But she also wants to see everybody be as successful as possible. We are also probably going to spend maybe 5 minutes on talking about her recent trip to Japan, because I want to know all about it. On June 21st, we have a bunch of people coming. So it's a panel discussion. We have V. Pendergrass, Cindy Robertson, Zoyal Red, and Toto Lin coming to talk about gender inclusivity and game design. And last but not least, our last show of the year. What's happening on that one, Kat?
So that's a host panel with the lovely Jay and hopefully the lovely Fertessa as well. And a friend of mine, Amanda Roberts, who is deeply involved in conventions from the, I suppose, operational side. And she knows a great deal about how you can look after yourself and survive conventions. And that's what we're going to be talking about, because we're taking our break to attend a bunch of conventions. So let's make sure we look after ourselves out there.
That's right. There's no care like self-care. All right, everybody. We will see you later. Thanks again to Natalie for coming on the show and spending 90 whole minutes with us. Wow.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see y'all
Thanks, Natalie.
later.